Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for tuning into The Scoop. I'm your host, Frank Chaparro, Director of Special Projects at The Block, and this has been a not so fun end to the year, but hopefully Larry, Tim, and Forrest will rejuvenate our spirits, as it were. Bitcoin's meteoric rise hit a speed bump this week, continuing its slide down to, I think, about 15% from an all-time high of what was it, 108. Larry, you've obviously been around. I think all of us are on our third cycle. I don't know about Forrest. Maybe this is your fourth.
Probably fourth for sure.
Fourth.
Yeah, for me, I think like if you look at even the last cycle, right, then it was a little bit of a weird one. There were at least 20% drawdown. So even the ones that we're seeing the last like couple of days is not even at, it's not even at 20% yet. And that generally happens at least once or twice, sometimes even 3 times in bull markets, where you just like wipe a lot of the leverage that's overexposed to the market itself. So while it's obviously not the greatest end of the year, I think we've had a pretty good year outside of that. And I think it's generally relatively healthy to wipe out a lot of people that are overexposed, because it gives more firepower for another move, right? Obviously, generally also bull markets end this way, so I don't want to overpromise anything, but personally, I would be surprised if this is it.
Yeah. One thing that's sort of surprising to me is the extent to which we're still, these drawdowns that are only like 15%, 10% feel so painful to, or at least in terms of sentiment, it feels so much more painful than I would expect at this point in Bitcoin or crypto's maturity as an asset. You'd think that the ETF flows would provide a bit of, I guess not a buffer per se, but a bit more stability, which
yeah. I'll respond to that too, and then I'll shut up. But I think overall, what's interesting about this cycle is that you just see that people are very underexposed to Bitcoin overall. Like you see constantly like Bitcoin going up and alts being like relatively stagnant and no one celebrating. Like you see no enthusiasm on Twitter. You see no enthusiasm anywhere because people are like massively underexposed to Bitcoin. I think, whether it's Microstrategy or, ETFs or whatever, they sucked a lot of that supply. And I think a lot of people have a lot less than they had last cycle, even, especially those that trade a little bit. And you can see every move where like Bitcoin maybe moves by 10%, but then you have a chill guy meme or whatever goes down 60% and people are panicking. So you see this constantly where I think this cycle, especially with altcoins, the swings are insane. And I think it's largely because people are more used to the fact that they generally draw down a lot more, and it's slightly more, especially when it comes to meme coins. Like you have this weird game where like everyone's like trying to front run the dump, so it ends up being larger than it used to be. And I think like again, especially for altcoins, especially for some of the meme coins, they stay relevant for a few months and they drop off in relevancy, and like no one wants to be the last one that's holding the bag. Even though Bitcoin hasn't really moved, right? Like and we were making fun of this, where like CoinDesk had this article of like Bitcoin plunges, to $97,000 or something. And it's like such a joke. If someone told me that a year ago, I would be like, what the fuck? How is this even a reality, right? Like we would all be celebrating. So I think like it's important to step back in these scenarios, and it's important to also realize that most of the market is not as exposed to Bitcoin as I think people assume it is. I think most people are very long altcoins, and there's just too many of them, and they end up having these huge drawdowns.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
On that point, there was a tweet from CZ in 2020 where he said, "I can't wait for the headlines to be Bitcoin crashes from 101,000 to 85,000." And 2020 must have been way lower prices, maybe back to like between 10 and 20K back then. And now we're actually in almost at that point, coming down from 108 to 92. And then in terms of like people being exposed to like more tokens and everything, I think it's really interesting if you compare the portfolios that people have today to what they had 3, 4, 5 years ago. I mean, people have always had fairly degenerate portfolios, but these days people have, some people have almost everything in meme coins and this and that. And I asked a research team how many tokens have been created on Pump.Fun, and it's 4.8 million tokens. And obviously a lot of them are zeroed out or whatever, but there's a lot of people putting a lot of their money into meme coins.
Yeah, well, it's easier to launch them. I mean, especially on blockchains like Solana.
Yeah, but also like I find the pump.fund like statistic pretty bullshit personally, because it's like it's similar as like number of coins that you see on CoinGecko, right? Like who the fuck cares how many coins there are, right? Like 99.9% of them get no traction whatsoever. But I think the argument stands where like it's just so simple to create new meme coins, and also all these like new narratives, like the peanut meme coin, right? Like the chill guy meme coin, like all these that are like very, I think, short term, right? Like why would peanut be relevant within a year? But you know, it ends up reaching billions of dollars of valuations. It gets listed on Binance, and then what, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, that's unique. That feels different. Like for us, I'm curious, like the extent to which the proliferation or Cambrian explosion of meme coins has impacted like early stage, like real projects from getting attention. Obviously, attention's kind of zero sum in a way. So if you've got people aping into chill guy, that means they're going to be maybe focusing less on like layer twos or bridging or whatever sort of, I guess, real type of project.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. So what is the real value? So who knows, right? So I think it's a very good market competition, right? No matter it's a meme coin, no matter it's a utility token, I think it doesn't matter, right? If meme coin can acquire more attention from traditional market, I think it's very good. And but when the meme coin went to their top, I think the direction will be changed. So I think maybe in the next year, the utility token will have better performance. Yes, I think it's a competition. If you build a so-called utility token, so-called protocol, so-called product, if you cannot acquire users, you lose. It's very reasonable, right?
I think that's why projects have to and I think you've seen this year with the two biggest hype projects in Monad and Berachain, like try to be almost, or at least capture to an extent, the power of memetics with the Bear thing and G Monad. You kind of have to be, even if you're not a meme coin, like 10% meme coin as a crypto project to capture the zeitgeist. I feel like Berachain maybe goes a little bit too far with appearing on stage with bear costume is a bit strange, but you kind of have to do that to get attention in this market.
I mean, you had Litecoin rebranding themselves as a meme coin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's just a go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. But I think, Frank, it's always been a little bit of a case, right? Where like historically always it was sort of an attention game. Like you saw it with like Ripple, with Stellar, or whatever else, where like it was mostly the community and the marketing effort that ends up like then actually getting more users involved. You saw the same thing for Solana. I find it like hilarious when people make the argument now that it has like so many users, so much TVL and blah blah, but when it was at $5, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, it had no users whatsoever. There was no activity at all until price started going up, until people started speculating, until people got good entries. And only then the utility and usability actually comes. And I think this is a relatively misunderstood part of crypto, is that if you don't give people an opportunity to actually enter at a relatively low valuation and then get a good exit eventually, they're just not going to care. They're not going to use they're never going to use the chain. And I think Solana like nailed this because they launched, at like, I think $1, 5 or 6 years ago. But even in the bear market, this time it was $5. So everyone that invested is now up like, 50 or 60x at that time. It rewards really early stage investors. Whereas, something like Starknet or zk-Sync or something, it's been hovering at $5 to $10 billion valuation. And it's difficult to get people excited to use the chain if the opportunity is not really apparent. And I think that's what's happening in the market quite often, is that you launch a chain, it opens at too high of a valuation, hovers there, doesn't give user any opportunity, and therefore no people actually use it on chain outside of farming. And I think that's something that like hopefully will be addressed. And I think like obviously Hyperliquid did a good job to try to flip that on its head, where it's finally something that people actually are using that's now distributing in a very fair way and rewarding users. But you see it constantly, right? Like, why is everyone tweeting about Hyperliquid? It's because everyone made a shit ton of money. And that doesn't happen unless you, I don't know, if you make a 2x, that's not enough. For most people, it's like 10 to 20x when you become a cultish follower. And I think it's misunderstood by project, but it's also hard to do. It's hard to solve for if you're a project too.
I do think the Solana community remained fairly like passionate and strong during the bear market. Like I was kind of surprised by that, because I thought it really declined. I'm sure maybe like the numbers tell a different story, but like anytime we write an article about Solana, there was always a huge community response and everything. So I do think they definitely had a bunch of passionate people that remained building, and then that led to sort of the projects that came out of it, and I think helped revive it.
Yeah, but just to quickly follow up, and I'm talking too much again, but I think that was because they still had the great entry from the last time that it was at these prices, right? Like they've already gone through the cycle of like, well, yeah, I bought at $2 and it went up to 200. Now, I think it could come back to the all-time highs again. Whereas again, like going back to the layer 2s that launched this year, you have Starknet and whatever else, ZK Sync and a bunch of others, where it's just hard to get people excited, I think, to talk about it, because it's just ranging, right? Like they didn't give you a proper return.
Maybe we can focus on private markets for a second. Obviously, crypto is unique because public and private markets are pretty interwoven and interlinked. But when you think about Q1 for us, what are you anticipating in terms of what categories will be hot in early stage venture, and what do you reckon the sort of deal pipeline looks like?
Yeah, I think for the perspective of Foresight Ventures, we are still very active in the market, but we are more selective than before. I think we need to find the project with long-term value, and they can create a unique product. They can onboard enough users, and the team should be very, very strong and experienced. I think, for example, game and NFT is very, very hard for the private market. But people, the attention of VCs now, I think they are focused more on like consumer application and AI crypto project. Yeah, and I think there will be other interesting sector is to bridge the product, bridge TradFi and the DeFi. Yeah.
Yeah, crypto AI is something that kind of entered the discourse this year and probably will be a big part of 25 story.
I can do some more like sharing. I think because there isn't about just combining two technology. Blockchain is fundamentally changing production relations, while AI is transforming production processes. So when these two come together, I think something really exciting happens. But no one knows what will it go, right? But I think, blockchain decentralized governance makes AI system more trustworthy. While AI improve blockchain efficiency, so crypto acts as the crucial bridge here. It enables sustainable incentive for AI models and make transaction between AI agents more efficient. So I think there must be some interesting project come. Yeah.
I wonder what the data is. I think we have it on Pro. We can track sort of the number of deals in the AI category. I'm sure it's gone up. I haven't looked.
It's definitely gone up, right? Like, we can pull up the numbers later, but it's definitely gone up primarily because a few AI deals did really well. And then, it kind of starts a avalanche of new projects that end up raising it, like, try to take advantage of that valuation. But But I think personally, I'm not an expert in AI projects. I think most of them I don't quite understand actually, and like why it makes a lot of sense. But what I think is a compelling view is that eventually there's going to be a bunch of like AI agents / AGI agents, right? Like independently thinking AIs. And it's sort of hard for me to imagine that they'll be using dollars or some like normal currency for transacting with one another. And so I think like one of the more interesting bull cases of crypto is that they might be transacting with one another at some point, right? And it could be Bitcoin, could be ETH, could be something else altogether. But I think like why would artificial intelligence ever use fiat currency? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, that's kind of like the flip side of what Forrest was outlining. He kind of made the point of how blockchain crypto can benefit AI, and then in that sense, this is how AI agents can use. That's more on like the sort of trustless verifications. This is payments. Like they actually will need
settlement.
AI
And not only that, wallets. But like think about like how do you get a bank account if you're AI? Like generally, unless laws and regulations change, you need to do KYC and stuff, and like that's obviously not going to be possible. So I think crypto is interesting for this, but that's more like a 10-year sort of horizon.
Yeah, Larry was like the first person I knew I knew personally to be super pro generative AI. You were using it pretty early.
As soon as it came out, it makes my job easier, right? Like you get so many fucking emails. You get 200 emails a day. And you need to respond to clients all the time and draft proposals. Like it just makes your life easier. And I think like that's generally how I measure usefulness of any technology. Is like how much time does it actually save you if you use it properly. And for me, it's like not just the time, it's also just the mental capacity of like having to write a fucking email that you don't want to write. Like, it takes me like 10 minutes to convince myself to do it. Whereas with this, like you write a couple of bullet points and does it for you. And the good part is that like ever since I started using it effectively since day one it came out, it got so much better. Like now that you're using the newest OpenAI one and you use it for some like actual thinking, whether it's a math problem or some logical problem, you can even ask advice about like token economics and it does pretty well. I think people would be surprised like that don't use it all the time with how good it has gotten over the last 6 months or so. And it really, for me, it's probably 40 or 50% of my time like that I'm in either OpenAI or Anthropic. I literally like use it every day for multiple hours.
Yeah. And I think crypto has a similar story. Like if you think back over the past 3 years, it's definitely gotten better from a UI perspective. Just opening Phantom, for instance, I feel like you notice like really nice new features. And I mean, just even from a technical perspective, like bridging 2 years ago was like kind of like it was like performing open heart surgery. Now it's a bit more seamless.
Even stuff like Polymarket, for example, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of like abstracts crypto to the enough degree that people that don't like crypto were using it. And it's similar with like some of these meme coin trading apps. I don't know if you guys used any of them yet, but like there's Moonshot. Literally, like you don't even know they're using crypto. You're using like Apple Pay and Venmo to buy shitcoins to gamble on them without like literally touching anything. And I think that in itself, while this is obviously gambling and it's kind of like not as interesting as other use cases, it goes to show that we've gone a long way of actually being more abstracting away the stuff that people get stuck with generally.
Yeah. And Tim, what about from your seat? What are you guys in the newsroom expecting for first quarter of the year? What are the big stories?
Hard to predict news going ahead. I mean, obviously, monitoring if there's going to be new ETFs. Like it's the moment you allow one, the question was like when Ethereum. The moment you allow Ethereum, the question is like when Solana, XRP, Dogecoin. We've done a couple of pieces looking at those like possibilities. I also think the sort of market structure around the ETFs is interesting. With sort of options is sort of like enabling more players to get involved. And you're seeing quite a big rise in OTC trading as well. So there's definitely like quite a lot of activity on that side of the market. And And then, so, while the sort of institutional side is definitely like developing really strongly, there's also the completely degenerate side that's sort of pushing through and trying to kind of break boundaries there as well. I mean, you sort of have Pump.fun live streams, very much like pushing the boundary in terms of even what the crypto community is comfortable with. Yeah, and then you have questions over like, which projects are going to really like capture attention. Obviously, Hyperliquid did super well this year. Is that, you're going to see projects building on their blockchain. You're going to see like sort of high performance ecosystem building there. It could be interesting. You've got the launches of Mona, Berachain, obviously a lot of hype around them. Can they deliver on that hype? These are definitely like the big narratives, but with crypto, the crypto news cycle is so fast that like even by January, we could be talking about completely different projects that no one's ever heard of.
I think the two most exciting narratives for me, one is that there's more focus on like actual public fundraising. So you saw with the Mega ETH deal on Echo, for example, where like people are pushing in the ICO route with obviously KYC. I think that's actually very exciting overall. It's like giving people the ability to invest at the same valuation as everyone else did a year ago. Even if you limit the size that people can invest with, I think is a trend that will not go away. I think it's actually the biggest missing piece in crypto right now is that everyone in the public market gets absolutely fucked with these high FTV stuff. But if you could invest, at 200 mil before it goes to 2 billion or whatever, it's good enough for most people. And I think that's going to be a huge trend. And I think Mega ETH started that with Echo. And I think second thing like goes back to what Tim said, but like the success of Hyperliquid as well as Polymarket goes to show that there will be more funding for consumer apps and more focus on like actually building users before you drop a token. And then the token will probably be more oriented on distributing to users that actually use your protocol versus like VCs and whatever else. So I think those are the biggest trends for me that I'm seeing right now. And I'm excited about both of them, honestly. Both of them make crypto better for the normal users.
Yeah, and it's a better mechanism of like user acquisition than sort of the age of airdrops, where a lot of that just resulted in projects paying 10K per customer, 15K per customer, and then basically like insta selling as soon as they got the chance, and then never using the project again. Whereas if you kind of get these folks involved early on with good terms, they're probably more likely to stick around. But that gives Force a bit more competition. I know the other venture guys. The masses are rising up against you.
It's okay for me, I think, because market is always with competition, right? So like for the product, if you don't have users, if the users don't want to use the product without incentive, so your product is wrong, right? So I think for my perspective, we do the bet on this in market with our like investment thesis. I'm pretty confident with that. And for like Larry mentioned before, so I think last cycle people always talking about digits, right? But there is maybe like millions of digits in the world. There will not be more digits in the world. So if we want to make crypto and blockchain real mass adoption, we need to make the real product for normal users. So I think every founder should think about it. You cannot play the game forever. You should make something real useful.
This was what I found really interesting earlier this year about Telegram games. Like this sort of came out of nowhere with Notcoin, really. And like there was the whole sort of financial speculation, people going for it for the airdrops, there's a lot of bots, etc., etc. But sort of aside from that, the thing that really stood out to me was the ease of onboarding and the UX. Like, with Telegram, you have sort of a native wallet within the application, and then you just click on this mini app, you just start playing the game, and it's as easy as anything to connect your wallet, and then you've basically got a crypto, you're sort of already playing a crypto native game, or you're in a crypto native application, and there's so much potential for things you can do within that, and it's so accessible for anyone. And like my biggest challenge was trying to find out like the real numbers of how many people sort of are onboarded through this, because there's obviously a lot of bots. But But I do think the fact that you've got something that's so easy for people to get involved with, and you've got Telegram rapidly improving these mini apps, means you've got one really big avenue to bring in a lot of people, especially from like certain countries around the world that maybe weren't as involved in crypto, and so just get them involved in a very sort of easy to use sort of way.
Yeah, I think to follow up on that, I think that's actually one of the bigger changes from last cycle, is that now there's actually abundance of like very cheap chains that are accessible, versus before it was like only a few, and most people were still using Ethereum, and getting stuck with high fees. Whereas now you have Telegram, you have Solana, you have Aptos, Sui, you have Mega ETH coming out, Bear Chain, whatever, all these new projects, and all of them are just hyper optimizing for being able to handle as many users as possible. I think like we've made huge strides with scalability this cycle compared to the last one and the one before. It's probably the biggest change that like you can observe yourself, is that you're no longer really forced to go to Ethereum for all these opportunities. Like now it's on these pretty cheap chains that have some trade-offs, but like Telegram one is really interesting because, like Tim said, it exposes a completely new demographic to crypto that didn't really interact before. It's a lot of people from low-income Asian countries, a lot of people from Russia, some from Africa as well, and that wasn't that common before. And you could see with some of the wallets, I think like there were a few wallets that added Telegram support, and their numbers just spiked like 5x in terms of number of users. So I think like I was also skeptical like Tim, like how many of these are actually real. But from what I've seen, like a lot of them are actually real, and it's new users that didn't use the chain before or use crypto before.
What do you think projects will have to do, or like layer one specifically, layer twos to a lesser extent? What will they need to do to stand out in 2025? Because, obviously we've got two new big ones kind of coming to market, three maybe. What differentiates everyone in a low fee, more scalable world?
I want to answer this question. So I think previously people or investors, they focus too much on technology, right? So I think, but we already have like a good enough infrastructure. Yeah, so I think in the future, founders, startups should learn how to capture the users in different regions. Right, you should have very good marketing team, very good operation team. You should design some campaigns, some like UI, good UI UX. I think it will be much more useful than build another very, very fancy technology stack. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing I've always noticed covering the space is look at the size and the passion of the community in order to value the project, whether or not it's a layer one, whether or not it's a meme coin. That's always what I've seen has been the biggest driver of price action generally. And that's why, it's interesting to see with like such pre-hyped projects like Monad and Berachain. It's like, can they then will that community momentum continue after it's launched, after they've got the tokens, whatever? If yes, then it's very interesting. If no, then they might struggle to compete. And that's why I think Solana's done so well this year, is because it started, I think, in I can't remember if it was 2021, 2022, with like it built up quite a passionate NFT community, and then it slowly grew and to the sort of meme coin craziness you see today. But it's that sort of passionate community that it's the same sort of thing that made Ethereum get really big instead of Bitcoin a few years before. And then now it's like people building communities around Solana instead of maybe Ethereum. And it's where you see some other projects struggle. It's where they haven't built these really passionate and sizable communities. So that's the number one thing I always look at.
Yeah, I think community is definitely important. So I guess like ways to engage the community or build it out geographically, to Forrest's point.
I think my focus would be personally, if I'm running a large like layer one or layer two, is you need to get an application like Hyperliquid, like Polymarket to be the breakthrough that actually like makes your chain visible, right? Like you look at like chains like Aptos, Sui, or whatever else, and like, you know, price is going up, but like very rarely do you actually have a need to go on Aptos and use something on chain or use Sui. And I think the reason is because there's nothing like that's really unique that like would make you go there, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people found Polygon because of Polymarket. I think they'll probably eventually go away from Polygon, but the point standing is that like your best marketing is get people to use your application that's built on the chain itself. And that's how I think you should win, because otherwise it's just everyone has the same marketing. I mean, you guys can see it. It's like everyone's saying the same thing. We're the lowest latency, you know, highest throughput chain. We're competing with milliseconds, blah, blah, blah. Like no one cares. In reality is no one cares. And Forrest is completely right. Like we've reached a point where things are scalable enough to handle all the users that we have today and more. Whereas all the previous cycles, you'd always get stuck with like, there were a few chains that maybe scale a little bit, but they would always hit walls where like there were just too many users to, you know, to be able to actually do their transactions. Right now, there's too many chains and not enough users to actually use enough of these chains and not enough differentiation. So I think they have to get creative. I don't think they win just on marketing. But Forrest was right. I think like going to different geographies, they're untapped, and then going for an application that could actually reach mass adoption and actually marketing that versus your chain, like really throwing, you know, your money behind the application versus the chain. I would guess that that's going to be a big trend of next year. So that like get your users first, not through like all these incentives and airdrops and all this bullshit, but get users by actually building something that people want to use. You know, the unfortunate reality though is that like Hyperliquid and Polymarket both are like kind of gambling apps, and it's kind of like to be seen, you know, when is the first time that someone built something that's not actually gambling. But I think that has to be the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little like skeptical on that for long-term success. Like obviously, you know, the more better protocols you have is great, but sort of relying on like one flagship one, I think I don't, you know, let's say you got Polymarket, people use Polychain for that. The moment Polymarket moves to another chain, all of that activity moves. You know, are they having to pay Polymarket just to stay on their chain? You know,
that will happen. I would guess that happens within the next 2 months. It's like, why would they continue to be on you know, on the chain that like very few people are currently using versus something like Solana that has more liquidity, more stablecoins and all that. But I think regardless, I think Tim, you're right. But I think regardless, like it helped put Polygon on a map because of that, and that then added a bunch of like benefits for them. Obviously, they have to take advantage of it, but ultimately, like it is all about like the underlying technology that something that's being used is using. And I think Polygon got a lot of attention that way.
Even if you have like first mover advantage, you then everything sort of does essentially get copy pasted onto every chain. Like if you look at DeFi, yeah, Uniswap had the first mover advantage back then, and yes, it's on other chains. But then you also start to see on Solana, they might, you know, gather around a Solana native DEX like Jupiter, for instance. So then you end up basically like, I mean, with DeFi, you pretty much have the same 5-6 apps on every chain. Like back in the day, it was innovative. Now they're just everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if you see prediction market apps on every chain. Like, and obviously it takes a while for the liquidity to spread across them, but you end up with that sort of like the projects that succeed are the ones where the community is sort of like built around them, even on that chain. And so if you have the really like biggest, more supportive community, you end up with the more sort of successful apps, regardless of if you were the first to invent them.
I think you're going to see a lot of, there's definitely a lot of behind the scenes BD wars happening with the chains. I wouldn't be surprised if they're all trying to pitch Polymarket to migrate over to their specific chain. And I'm sure there's tons of incentives that they're dangling.
Probably a shit ton of money, right? This must be in like tens of millions. Polymarket has a very good spot.
Absolutely. So I guess in terms of what everyone's most excited about over the next 6 months, maybe we can go through that and wrap up.
I think we've touched on like some of the things that like all of us will probably mention, but for me, what's exciting now is that, now we don't really have any more excuses about why there are not as many users in crypto, whereas before it was always like there was a pretty good excuse for why we couldn't scale properly. I think what I'm excited about is that in the next 12 months, we're primed to finally properly incentivize user-centric applications to actually be able to raise a lot of money and be able to actually launch their apps. And that's what really excites me and you saw it with a few funds like Paradigm announced that they're going to focus on specific apps, to be able to fund them. And outside of that, you have Hyperliquid, you have Polymarket, you have a few that like kind of made it out of the crypto bubble. Polymarket doesn't have a token, but Hyperliquid, probably the most successful token that we've seen over the last 2 years, at least so far. I think it's amazing that now we finally have incentives for those apps to be built. And it's kind of like day D for us within the next 2 years. We have a very important mission in front of us, which is we need to fund the right apps. Those apps have to be able to get users. And if they don't, and it's only gambling that's still being used, then I think like crypto, I would be disappointed by crypto. I think there's a lot of like novel use cases that we haven't yet really found, specifically because they were never rewarded. Like no apps were ever rewarded. No apps could ever raise a lot of money, could ever make a lot of money from a token. So that's why you sell so many layer ones and layer twos, is because it's just easy to make money. I think now that's flipping on its head, and I'm excited to see that happen. It would be the best thing ever if we have millions of users like using these chains for an app that you can't find anywhere else. And that's what crypto allows you to do, right? Like through regulatory arbitrage and other means. I think there are things out there that we haven't tried yet that could attract, even our parents to be able to use some of these chains without them knowing. And that's what really I think is the cool part about crypto, and hopefully that happens in the next 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we definitely don't need any more chains. I mean, there's...
Yeah, because the chain can raise money more easier, right? Much easier. And you can sell the token to the retail users. But in the long term, I think, because people should understand product and the technology doesn't has moat, but your data, brand, network has moat. The know-how to even the know-how to how to enter the Asia market, I think it's very, very hard, even for me. If you want to communicate with the KOL, with the community in Southeast Asia, in Korea, in Taiwan, it's also very hard for me. Yeah, I think it's much harder than build something like ZK. I think it's much harder. They build a ZK product, build a parallel VM product. Yeah, and I'm very confident about the industry. No matter people is disappointed with the a venture token, like a meme coin, I think it's not important, because people need decentralization forever. So we should base on the decentralization to build some product or protocol for normal users. Yes. And for Foresight perspective, we didn't care about any other opinions. We just want to invest disruptive innovation. If people can't understand, but we think it will happen, we will invest. That is very important investment thesis for us.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in a deal like Lens. I feel like what you guys recently did alongside Wintermute, I think, as well. They just announced, I think it was a series.
We have lots of deal. Maybe you talk about, I don't know if I can tell the name. Yeah, it's okay.
Sounds good. All right, gentlemen. We'll see you in the new year. Oh, wait, Tim. No, we didn't talk about weird.
I know. I was like, you just rug him?
I just
rugged you. I was like, did I get away with that? Sure. So for me, I think the two things I'd like to see... I feel
like you're excited for Emergence 2025. I've never seen you smile so much.
I mean, that goes without saying. I mean, Emergence was cool. Like, it was just surprisingly good for everyone who was involved in building it. Yeah, I think people kind of didn't expect it to be that big. I've got friends in London who run events, and like one of them, he's been doing it for like 4 years, and we went straight away and did like an event that was like as big as like their sort of fourth year one. And they were like, wait, you went, he was sort of very surprised that our first event was like, that big, quality of speakers, that sort of thing. And we've got a lot of people that are going to be coming back next year, which is exciting.
Yeah, as long as we can figure out a slot where you've got the direct flights to Prague, that was the big.
As long as Forrest wants to still fund it.
Yeah, that's it.
Don't worry.
Yeah, can you pay the airlines to do direct flights more?
Like the flight that they did for the the Dubai conference, the cringe one, where they just bought the entire flight. It's surprisingly, it's not that expensive. Like when you buy the entire flight, but it's such a fucking joke.
In terms of what I'm looking for next year, I think it's more innovation and more main characters. So those are the sort of two things that are most interesting as a journalist to sort of write about. And I think we saw some things happen this year, but it feels like a lot of sort of what's been built over like the last few years has been, somewhat repetitive when you see like the same DeFi protocols being built on new chains that are all high performance in slightly different ways. Whereas to see people like really pushing the boundaries is what I find really interesting to cover. The sort of bleeding edge of crypto.
Sam.
Say again?
You need a new Sam.
Well, that's the other thing, as well as like new projects doing like really interesting stuff with crypto. You also need like the really interesting figureheads that are like just fascinating to write about, and sort of personalities that are willing just to innovate and create really like interesting things. Obviously, there are risks with that. The sort of people that have innovated the most. You've seen things like Luna. Obviously, there's risks of things collapsing, but I think when you see crypto innovating, that's when it's at its most fun.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, you got no question. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you think that MicroStrategy blows up in the next 2 years?
That's a good question. I was always very skeptical of Michael Saylor, and I feel like only recently have I succumbed to the idea that I've probably been mid-curving my impression.
Oh, really?
of him. Obviously, like I think that like it's one of those things that like it's like that meme, like once the music stops, like you're gonna be so fucked, and like that person's portfolio is up like 50%, and the other one's is like up like 100,000%. Basically, like once if you think that Bitcoin hits like a threshold, I think for them to be underwater, it's like 27,000. Like there's a risk of that happening, obviously, but I think the risk is fairly low. I haven't actually done the math. That's like how he's communicated it. But yeah, it's like a weird leverage derivative. That's their company. So it's kind of absurd as a vehicle. And I wouldn't put money into it. But if that is the threshold, I do think that like the risk there is relatively low. But
yeah. The problem though is that it becomes a magnet at some point, probably, right? Like
a scary one. Yeah, and then it's like then you have like a systematic.
Sell me all your Bitcoin at 27K.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the phrase Caroline used? Oh no, we'll buy it from you at this price. Like, yeah. I just think I don't understand why it's got so big. Like, I feel like if you sort of maybe you believe in Bitcoin as a corporate thing, you're doing a strategy. I get it, but I feel there's only so much Bitcoin you need before anything above that is kind of superfluous.
I think the explanation is pretty simple, which is like in the bond markets, you basically have traders that are used to very little risk and very little upside. And this gives them the opportunity to just get so much more exposure to so much more upside. And because it's made so much money to people that have bought this like a year ago, it's making it, very hard for other bond managers to not buy in this right now. It seems like a very like popular trade from the perspective of like in the bond market, you cannot get anything better in terms of a risk profile.
Yeah.
Especially if you think that Bitcoin price will go up. So I think that's why it's gotten so large, is that it's just, despite being 0% interest rate, like there's infinite amount of demand because these people don't know what to buy, and this gives them the best risk profile to actually return a good amount and therefore get paid in, their bonuses and all that. But I do think what's scary is, like, I think, Frank, you're right. I think the chance is relatively small. What is scary though is that he keeps buying regardless of the price. Like, buys at 105,000, like, and he will continue doing this with huge size because now he's getting the most capital he's ever got.
Mm-hmm.
So like the liquidation price, the theoretical liquidation price, will continue going higher as he continues to buy more, as long as people are still buying his bonds. And I think that's pretty scary. I hope it doesn't happen. I think it would be terrible for everyone. It's probably one of the biggest risks in the market that I've ever seen, like much larger than FTX, much larger than anything else, because the amount that he has is just so huge.
It's huge.
I mean, that's the thing that's like concerning to me is like with Mt. Gox, the worry was just because it was such a large amount of Bitcoin. And now you've got a similar situation where you've got an even bigger amount of Bitcoin that could theoretically come on the market, maybe in one go if, it all went south. Yeah. And personally, I think it's like people love that, are happy to praise this sort of thing because the price goes up. And, talks of like the US Strategic Reserve buying Bitcoin, a large amount of Bitcoin there. People are like, great, that means price will go up. But when you realize that actually you're creating more Mt. Gox scenarios where you're basically creating these overhangs where there could be this huge amount sold at any point in the future. And it actually, if anything, it creates more concern than if you had even maybe slightly less demand, but split up amongst like a lot more different buyers.
If you had the government buying Bitcoin, then you've got $1 million Bitcoin. If Michael Saylor,
but then you've also got the risk that they change government and they just market dump everything in one go. Like,
Fed is like relatively independent. It depends under which structure it actually happens, right? Like if it's through the central bank, it's relatively safe. But I agree. I think like it's possible it works out for Saylor. I think it's quite likely, but it's like such a like unnecessary risk that we now have, where like everyone has to think about it. And it's a big difference. It's like, well, now price is at 100. Let's say worst case scenario goes to 50. Well, now that you have this like magnet that eventually will be there, and then if that gets offloaded, like we're so fucked.
Worried. Yeah, and then that kind of
it becomes it's good when price goes up, but if it goes down, and I'm not talking on the 15% down price, if it goes down by 40% or 50%, like that's when things start getting scary.
And that's when it becomes a magnet.
Because especially if they start unwinding, the price gets lower.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've almost got a almost like a lunar cycle.
Well,
where
hopefully
it gets,
not.
Worse and worse.
Yeah. But I think it's a real risk, even if it's like a 2-3% chance or whatever we price it at. It's like, holy shit, if it happens, like that could threaten the entire industry.
Yeah, I think that is probably the biggest risk. Now that we kind of don't have political, I guess maybe nuclear war would be through that too.
Yeah, or like AGI, starting to attack encryption and stuff like that could be crazy too. There's a lot of stuff like that, I think now. Yeah. That's probably the most like uncertain times we have.
Yeah.
The quantum stuff's quite interesting because I wonder at what point do we have to get really serious about that discussion? Like at what point do we go?
And the hardest
we need to have.
And I think the hardest part is that you just don't know, right? Like, most experts say it's 5 years away at least, if not 10. But like, who knows, right? Within 2 years, you make some huge progress, and like it's like a week away, and then like, what the fuck do we do?
Yeah, this sort of thing can just speed up so rapidly. Yep. I think what you want to do is start having alternative chains or testing chains. Like, why is there not? You could have a quantum resistant Bitcoin testnet, and then you have that running for like a year or so, and then you've got like some sort of history, some sort of reliability, because you don't want to be doing this in a week or two and putting everything on the line for something that's just not even tested.
I had a friend from high school reach out to me saying if it was a smart idea to buy IOTA because it's apparently quantum.
Man, I wonder how they still reach people at this point. It's been like 6 years.
IOTA, I haven't heard that in years.
I know. Mr. Like, Dominic.
The Tangle, what was the Tangle?
Tangle chain or something. What was it? It was a DAG, right? DAG, and then it was like some Tangle chain or something.
You have VeChain sponsoring the UFC.
Are they also
that one still gets prominence. Oh, I don't know, but I just like they're from like back in the day as well.
Are they older?
If IOTA and VeChain are listening, we love you. Please sponsor the block as well.
Yeah. No, VeChain, we love VeChain. UFC with them a few weeks ago. All right, gentlemen. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Frank.
Cheers.
Thanks.